Hello, everyone. It is great to have you here again. My name is Gary Fowler, and I am the host of GSD Presents Silicon Valley AI and Tech. I'm a serial entrepreneur with 17 startups under my belt. I've been involved in 2 unicorns. I was on the original management team at Click Software, sold to Salesforce for $1.35 billion, and also Eva.ai, an AI HR tech company that I co-founded 5.5 years ago. Oh my God, it seems like yesterday. Anyhow, it is with great pleasure. I must say this is the first time I've had a doctor on the show that came right out of, it looks like surgery, a good friend of mine, Haider. And we're going to talk today about medical ventures and explore what's happening in investment, his own life and entrepreneurship, and some of the things he's done. He's just a fascinating individual. And with that, I'd like to bring Dr. Haider on. Hey, Namir, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Gary. Very nice to be on the show with you today.
Yeah, it's great. I'll tell you what, it's the first time. I mean, it's like you're right out of surgery or something here today.
Yeah, I am right out of surgery. So
well, I appreciate you can make time for us. I hope somebody's not open waiting for you.
No. I coordinated my schedule to make sure I had plenty of time today.
Okay. No, it's great to have you. So I got a question for you. I mean, I know you're an entrepreneur. I know you're an investor, but how do you go from New Hartford Senior High School to King Edward in Pakistan? How did that, is that like one day you wake up and say, oh, I want to try something a little bit different. I'm going to go to Pakistan. How was that?
Because well, I think to answer that question, I got to give you a little family background. So my great-grandfather was in the Order of the British Empire by Queen Victoria. So he was given an OBE. So way back in the early 1900s, he traveled to England. And so my family's had a big connection with the West since that time. His son, my grandfather, was the head of the intelligence services for Pakistan, East and West in the 60s and 70s. In fact, he's the one that took Henry Kissinger on a secret mission to China, which was not known to the public. It was only recently, told that he went there when U.S. had no relations with China. So he was the one that, with the president at that time, General Ayub Khan, coordinated the U.S. relations with Nixon and China. And so there came a time when my grandfather, who was in the intelligence services, told my dad, who was a doctor, who had studied at King Edward, that, I think the future for you, my son, is in America, because he had very close. At that time, we had a base in Pakistan. The U.S. had an Air Force base. I don't know if you remember, Gary Powers actually flew that U-2 out of Pakistan over Russia when he was shot down. And
I got to tell you, Namir, I'm probably one of the few Americans that have been in the special museum in Russia that has the parts to Gary Powers' plane and like the cigarettes and his medical kit and his pistol. I actually was some good friends of mine that are connected took me in there, and I must say it's interesting to connect the dots today. What a story!
Yeah. So that's an interesting story. So my dad came to first Canada in the late 50s. And actually, I think 59. And then from there, just after finishing his training at McGill, post-grad training after King Edward, he ended up in the States and then ended up settling in upstate New York, because my dad was originally born in Kashmir, where the climate is sort of like upstate New York. And he liked that, that kind of weather. And it was, in those days, close to where all his friends were in Toronto and New York City and Boston. And so it was sort of a central place. So I ended up growing up in upstate New York. And one summer, my grandmother was visiting, and she said, well, to my parents, why don't you send this boy, because my grandfather had died, why don't you send him to study medicine over there like you did? And my dad asked me, because I was applied, and it was accepted at all sorts of universities in the States, planning on going here. And he said, well, look, this is an opportunity. It's a bit different. But if you want to, you can do it. I graduated from high school a year early, so I was 17, and I went straight into an accelerated medical program there at age 17, and I actually finished medical school at age 22, and then came back to the States. So it was a pretty pretty interesting situation. And I'm glad I did it at this point in life. So.
Now, how different is it? So when you go over there, like culturally, how different is it when you come into Pakistan? So what are some of the some of the differences? Or is it the same?
Oh, well, it's definitely not the same. I think that things have probably changed for the better in the past, 20 years since I graduated. But actually, almost 30 years now. But really, when I went, it was in the 80s, and at that time, the U.S. had a huge presence there because we were trying to get the Russians out of Afghanistan. So I guess I could say there was a bit of a duality, because on one hand, I was an American student that looked Pakistani in a Pakistani medical school. I didn't speak the language at that time, and I
You
had to
didn't
sort of
speak the
adjust.
language? How in the world was that? I mean, you come in and you're trying to go down through. What did they look at the anatomy? How did you? I mean, I know I know a bit of Russian, and I know, if you look at a chart, it's hard to make out what's a spleen. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, you point, but how did you
Well,
figure it out?
Well, King Edward Medical College was named after King Edward VII, so it's actually one of the oldest medical colleges in the world. It's now it's about 150 years since it was founded. So it was always in English. So the good thing was the education was by usually British trained professors and doctors, and all the education was using British and American textbooks. So that wasn't the issue. The real issue was just in class and understanding the local culture. So, like I said, it was interesting because during the day I was really in college with the locals and the local students, but in the evenings I made friends with people who were at the American Club and at the American Embassy, and I had a lot of friends that were in the Marines, the Marine security guards, and so in the evenings I hung out with them, and I really didn't miss America because I was hanging out with all the Americans. So I sort of got an exposure to both worlds at that time.
Yeah, I know when I was in Russia, Namir, I had the same thing. I'm still co-chair of the American Chamber of Commerce Technology Committee in Moscow, and I'd go to the Spazo House to the events, and so you had that kind of like plug-in, so you didn't lose all the American stuff. But it is fascinating to learn about another culture, and the nuances that are there, and everything from dating to friendship and travel, just thinking differently is an incredible experience. Wow. What that had to be, I don't know what it was like at 17 though. That had to be like really eye opening. You come back and
it was eye opening because, in college, I was one of the youngest students because the local students were actually a few years older than me because I graduated early in the States, and they're required to do a little extra stuff before they enter medical school there. And then, at the American Club, we had, covert operative agents that were there, and, we would be talking to them, but I was still a 17-year-old kid, and it was just, it was fascinating. So.
That's great. It sounds like based on your family life, you could write a book. I mean, I can see a kind of a Bourne kind of thing gone with your family and Nixon and Henry Kissinger. It sounds like an interesting story. Seriously.
Yeah, there's more to the story. One of my grandfather's best friends was Pierre Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's dad. He had he met him when he was crossing the border during the partition of India and Pakistan, and they became friends at that time and remained friends throughout their lives. So there are a lot of stories. So you're right. I probably could write a book.
Yeah, no, it sounds fascinating. I love it. Life is really, it's about a book. It's a journey, and each time what you want to do to be able to keep yourself moving forward and excite yourself is, enjoy and rejoice in that journey. So that's really great. I love to hear those stories. Okay, so now you go down through medical school, you finish medical school, you go to yeshiva. So what was that about? Was that a residency program here, or what was that?
Yeah, so when I graduated from medical school, I came back to the States, and I was 22, and at that time the tech boom was going on before the bubble burst, and I had some friends that were involved in various different ventures. So I actually initially didn't want to go into medicine at that point. I think I was a little young for cutting people open on a full-time basis. Mm-hmm. So I had some friends, actually, one of my friends, Shahal Khan, and I started one of the first voice over IP companies in the world. And actually, through satellite technology at that time, we're connecting calls between the States and Europe, and then even the States and the Middle East. So that was something that we started, but we were a little too early for a couple of reasons. One was that the technology was not optimal at that time. There was a lot of packet loss, so you didn't often get the best conversation between parties. But the other issue was there were no regulations in any countries or laws that pertain to voice over IP, so we were getting shut down in various different countries because it was considered a form of espionage to be communicating through that technology without the official permission of the government. So
wow.
yeah.
I remember, I had Magic Jack. I don't know. That was about the.
Yeah, this was prior to Magic Jack. It was
really?
prior to all of that. Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. So what happened then? So you decided you decided to go do the yeshiva thing. So you didn't give up technology. You just moved forward.
So what happened? The bubble burst, and a lot of the things that were going on, sort of came to a screeching halt. And again, my mom said to me, "Look, you went to medical school. You need to go and you need to finish up and do your training and get." My dad passed away, unfortunately, while I was in medical school. And one of the things my dad did, he had a large pathology lab. He was a pathologist, clinical laboratories throughout upstate New York. And before he died, he actually donated his whole lab business to the local hospital system, which later on ended up selling it for, in the tune of what I heard, like $100 million. But my dad was a big inspiration for me, and I think at that point I thought I was going to go into pathology because that's what my dad did. But I had some interviews. I specifically remember I was at Georgetown, and I went for a residency interview, and we went in the basement, this dark corner, and I saw a young lady resident cutting a brown piece of meat into small little pieces. And the professor said to me, "You'll be spending your first year here." I looked around and I thought, I don't think I can do this,
it ain't going to happen, right?
Right. And then I thought maybe psychiatry, because I wasn't sure. So I remember I was on a psychiatry interview at George Washington in DC. And while we were in the psych unit, there was a lockdown, and right in front of me, one of the patients attacked the female resident, and I had to help her and stop him. And then I thought about that, and I said, "No, I don't think I want to do this either." So I had a friend that was doing what's called physical medicine and rehabilitation at Cornell.
Mm-hmm.
And he said to me, "Look, this is an up-and-coming field. It deals with people's injuries, spinal cord injuries, brain injuries, musculoskeletal system. I think you'll like it." So I actually did interview in that, and I ended up really enjoying it. And I ended up I spent 1 year at East Carolina University in North Carolina, and then I came back to New York because I quite honestly missed New York. And then I was at Albert Einstein Yeshiva University, and I spent the rest of my residency there, and I actually was the chief resident there as well, and got my basic training over there. So.
Okay, so now you've got these labs, and move forward. What about technology? I know it sounds like that's your passion, and you love technology. So what's happening there?
So what I find is, being a physician, and I practice, medicine and surgery about 3 days of the week. I used to be more full-time, but now it's about 3 days of the week. What I find is that there's a huge disconnect between the medical community and the tech community. And that's why you often see many of these companies get funded for something, and then you end up seeing a couple of years later, Theranos, for example, is one where they're still having legal issues. But you find that because of that disconnect, the investments aren't made maybe as appropriately as they should be, and a lot of times the technologies that may be groundbreaking, when it comes to commercialization, you don't see the companies doing as well as you thought they would based on the idea or the technology that they're touting.
Mm-hmm.
So what I find is that if you being in my position where I'm somewhat involved in the technology as well, and in startups and in companies, but also I keep my hand into clinical research. I'm a primary investigator for a lot of FDA clinical trials. And by doing that and actively practicing surgery, I sort of know what's going on the street in medicine and in healthcare. I've started my own surgery centers, and I've been on the board of some of the largest medical malpractice carriers in the country. And so I find that connecting those dots really can help in determining, where the future is for technology as far as healthcare is concerned.
So what are you interested in today? I know you've got a cybersecurity company. So what's interesting for you today? And then also, what are some of the trends? What are things that are going to happen that people should be aware of? Investors and startups that are looking for
Sure.
ways to be able to start companies.
So, what I'm interested in today is, as a result of COVID, one of the things that I did was I've had my own clinical laboratory in addition to practicing medicine and surgery. And we've been doing various different testing over the years. We happen to have a machine that pharmacogenomic testing that basically looks at the DNA, a particular person's DNA, and checks their enzyme metabolism to see if they actually can metabolize certain drugs. So, for example, if your child has ADHD, there are a variety of different drugs the psychiatrist or their primary could put them on. How do you know which one is the right drug? Well, you don't. And what they do is, right now, trial and error. You try this one, it doesn't work. You have a side effect. You try another one, it doesn't work. You have a side effect. Well, through pharmacogenomics, we can actually look at a person's DNA and see which drug they metabolize properly, which drugs they don't metabolize, and based on that, provide individualized therapy. So we were doing that, and my lab was doing that, but then COVID came up. And as a result of COVID, Governor Cuomo shut down our surgery centers in New York, and so we weren't as active in doing surgery and medicine and the neurosurgical type procedures that I usually do. So I found out that the machine that I had also is one of the best, if not the best, machine to do COVID-19 PCR testing. So we started doing PCR testing on that platform, and as a result of that, we're able to help, and we still are, even though COVID is pretty much under control now, except for this Delta variant. But we're testing children that are going to camp, and we're testing children in schools to get them back to school. But the forefront of that is that the whole idea of molecular biology, which really has not been looked at from a laboratory aspect before, to look at diagnosing, say, UTIs and diseases in real time, in hours versus in days. You don't have to wait for a culture to grow anymore. Now you can look at the DNA of the bacteria, and within a few hours, you can tell you what the bacteria is and treat it. So you're really ahead of the game. So I think this molecular diagnostics is something that you're going to find it's going to be a game changer in how we diagnose medical conditions. So that's one of the things I'm interested in very much so.
What about this thing with, gene splicing and basically taking out the bad stuff? So what's going on with that? Because it seems to me that, if we could do that, so if somebody's got a predisposition for cancer or whatever it is, Alzheimer's, to be able to do that, is it real? Is it going to happen?
So that is real, and it's going to happen. But as with any technology, it can be good and bad. So it has to be done properly. And, there has to be, the consumer has to understand what's being done. And, the unfortunate thing is application of that technology, just as we heard with this, vaccine, people don't trust it, So I think the trust has to come out in there. The technology is there, and with research and with studies, we will find that there are going to be a number of diseases that we can treat. And we can modify, as you mentioned, the cells of the body to maybe not become diseased, or maybe to treat certain diseases that we already have. So that is definitely something on the forefront. But I think one of the issues that we have in our country is the FDA can be good and bad. It can hold us back when we need to be held back, so we're not cloning everybody and creating, an alternate race. But on the other hand, it also inhibits us from really studying things. For example, I'll tell you, one of the things I do is stem cell treatments. So I do stem cell treatments for musculoskeletal and neurological conditions. And the two ways that we do it currently is either with PRP or with blood products. We take what's called the platelet-rich plasma, and we centrifuge it out. or we take BMC, which is bone marrow concentrate, which is the bone marrow cells, which are more primitive cells, and then we inject them into joints, even into the bones at the junction of the articular cartilage to help that cartilage grow, and we've seen that it works. But, the FDA has an advisory out: if you do anything more than minimally manipulate those cells, it's not legal, and it becomes illegal. So people are going out of the country to maybe get some of these treatments to Mexico and to Europe because we can't do them in the States because of the laws. So I think we have to look at some of our laws, but that's definitely on the horizon and in the future.
Yeah, and what about like for the heart? So I had heard that there's a place called the Life Institute in Panama that actually can, people that have heart attacks or challenges, they can actually do stem cells. Is it true that they can actually help in those situations? Is it that advanced?
So, it depends. You have to look at exactly what they're doing. So when we talk about stem cells, it's a very general term. One of the things the FDA just came out with a couple of weeks ago is that the amniotic cells, amniotic fluid, people were using it to take placental amniotic fluid and inject that into people's bodies for improvement. But when we did the clinical studies, we found that in those amniotic fluid, samples that were tested from various different companies that produced them, there were no living stem cells. So really, were those stem cells, or were they just cytokines, which are sort of mediators that promote your endogenous cells, or the cells that are in your body, to grow better? So yes, what we find is that many of these treatments do work. They can help improve, say, heart disease, as you mentioned, but many of them are also, sort of sham treatments. So until you really know what the science is and what you're getting, a generic term like stem cells doesn't really mean much unless I really dig in deeper and find out what those actual particular stem cells are.
Oh, wow, that's incredible. So when are the laws going to change so people have a chance to be able to live longer?
Well, I think the laws, I think it's going to take a long time. We can't even get, a national referendum on marijuana, so doctors who prescribe it can legally do it in a state, but federally it's still against the law. So unfortunately, I don't know how quick that's going to be, and that's the major issue we have. One of my passions is neuromodulation, which is applying electrical or optical signals to nervous tissue, the brain, the spinal cord, peripheral nerves, to treat a variety of different conditions. There's a whole load of conditions you're going to find that are going to be treated over the next 10, 20, 30 years. But, because of the laws that we have, which are probably antiquated, because the laws aren't keeping up to pace with the technology, and they may be better in other areas, like telecommunications or things that you're dealing with. But when it comes to health, because there's that disconnect between the medical community and the tech community, and because those people aren't sitting together like we are today, it's very hard to change those laws. And we saw that in COVID. I think one of the greatest things that happened was that there was a mandate to push the vaccine to be developed quickly. Because if the vaccine was under normal circumstances with our normal FDA, you've heard it could take 5 to 10 years to get approved. Because we came in and there was a mandate to do it quickly, it was done, and now we have the benefits of that. So if we can have those kind of mandates, or we can have the laws change quickly, then you can have this technology available, and you'll have more funding for it, and you'll have applications for it, and people will be getting better. But until we have that, the connection between the tech leaders of the world and the healthcare leaders of the world, I think it's going to be very difficult.
Interesting. And what about Neuralink? And it seems to me that at some point in time we're going to be able to modify, the brain cells so that we're able to, for short-term and long-term memory, kind of like a Nikola Tesla thing, where you're going to be able to absorb. So they're going to say, "Oh, you want to go to Shiva? No problem. Hey, let's do a download. It's going to take 20 minutes, and we were going to modify." So these. Is that realistic? What do you think about the future, Neuralink and some of those technologies?
It's definitely realistic. So those technologies are basically treating the brain, and we have different types of technologies when treating the brain. Usually they're what we call deep brain stimulation, where we actually take an electrode And this is an electrode that's a platinum iridium electrode, and we drill into the brain and we put a lead right into the brain and stimulate a particular part of the brain, say the cingulate gyrus or some particular part of the brain, to get some sort of benefit. What are those benefits? Right now we're treating Parkinson's disease, depression with transcranial magnetic stimulation. So those are things. Then there's cortical stimulation, where we stimulate the cortex of the brain, but that has different. It may not be the same, have the same effect as treating the interior of the brain or different parts of the brain. But the issue is that right now we're basically creating therapies that are electrically based to try to modify the nervous system, but we're doing it in what I call sort of a shotgun approach. So when we have a shotgun, you shoot, there may be some collateral damage. Remember, Dick Cheney had some collateral damage when he shot his shotgun, right? So
he didn't know anything about it, right?
Right. So that's what we have right now as far as the therapeutics are concerned. Mm-hmm. But what we need, and what is coming on the horizon, is that we need what's called closed loop neuromodulation, which means that we have sensors that can sense what's going on in every neuron of the brain. The brain is highly complex, and the amount of data that needs to be transmitted out of the brain to change a therapy, to affect it in the way you're talking about, it's possible over time, but it will require sensors, optogenic potentially, or electrical sensors that can sense what's going on in each individual neuron and those pathways, and then as a result of sensing those signals, can apply a therapy based on what the sensors are doing. Right now, we don't have sensors to that level where we can detect what needs to be done and use AI, as you would do, to modify and implement the therapy. But that is coming on the horizon, and that will be the game changer when we have that closed loop type of neuromodulation and taking those sensors and taking that data and using that data to provide a specific individualized treatment for you as an individual versus the person next door.
Oh, I love it. I remember reading Nikola Tesla, many of his patents, and then a bit about his life story. And at 6 years old, he had a seizure, and after that, he had eidetic imagery. He could remember everything after that fact. And one of the reasons he went to engineering school, he didn't have to pick up the books and do the research because he would remember it. And so it's fascinating to me when you talk about people that had a photographic memory that can read, visualize the pages of a book and that kind of thing. So it is possible. The question is, how do we open that gate, and where's that gate located?
So I think that gate, is it's a matter of funding, and I think that's happening now. We're getting it. Usually in this country, and in the world, a lot of the funding comes through military technologies that we end up later applying, in other areas. So as long as there's funding and there's scientists that are looking to do this research, you're going to see, even blindness, for example. We have sensors that and treatments that can work on improving vision and things like that. Cochlear implants work on hearing. So there are many different, types of therapies that are going to be improved. We even have an implant now for sleep apnea where we put a lead next to the nerve that supplies the pharynx. And instead of using that big mask that people have to use, a CPAP or a BiPAP machine, we can actually stimulate the nerves to open up the airway during the inspiratory phase so that you can get air in and cure things like sleep apnea. So all of that is actually, that's here today. And there are many more things coming on the horizon.
Wow, that's amazing. I actually have a CPAP machine, so I know what it's all about.
Yeah, so you won't need it. I could get you hooked up to get that.
I love it. I love it. So we're coming to the top of the hour. Namir, what are some of the, closing thoughts and any other things that you're working on, and how can people reach you if they're an entrepreneur or an investor? What's the best way to contact you?
So I think some of the closing thoughts are the technology is there, the scientists are there, and I think it's just a matter of getting getting our FDA and getting the government to help these emerging technologies to get what we call breakthrough status, so that really we can apply them to people and do clinical trials and make sure they're safe, and then get them to the population. One of the main concerns that I have is, and it's been mentioned, is the cybersecurity of all these devices. So legacy devices, for example, There's so many things that we could do right now to take care of people and help people. But the main reason that those therapies aren't applied is because they're not safe from a cyber perspective. For example, if you can remotely control a defibrillator, you could kill somebody by turning that on and turning the amplitude or the voltage high, and messing their heart up. And there are other machines in the hospital, such as ventilators, that are controlled through Bluetooth. But if somebody else gets the control of a ventilator, they could shut it off and you're not breathing. So I think we really need to look at bringing cybersecurity into healthcare. So I think that's an area that has been neglected by most of the big medical device manufacturers. And I think we need to cross that bridge to get cybersecurity in there. But I think, as far as the future is concerned, there are great advancements coming as a result of the technology we have today and the forthcoming technology. And if you want to get a hold of me, I'd be happy to share my email. It's Dr. Haider, DrHaider at killpain.com, KILLPAIN. And Gary, you've got my contact information, so anybody can always contact me through you as well.
No, it's great. I appreciate, Namir, for taking your time out of your busy schedule and to join us today. To my audience, I want to say thank you for one more time for joining my show. My name is Gary Fowler, and this is GSD Presents Silicon Valley AI and Tech. And it's with great honor today that Dr. Haider is here with us, and I appreciate it. Stay tuned for next week. I will be back on Tuesday for another exciting show, and we'll see you again next week. Have a great weekend. Stay safe, stay happy, and keep smiling. Talk to you later.